Good afternoon, everybody. As we've heard the previous speakers, the Director General of the Department of Environmental Affairs, Mr. Valimusa, and David Fenter, climate change is certainly a topical issue, and especially a topical issue for agriculture in this year's Congress. With me, I have two distinguished guests. Tony Esmeraldo, I don't need to introduce you again. You've done so well this morning in your introduction to the work that Corteva is doing. And Andrea Campher, the head of Agri SA's Risk and Disaster Management Unit. We're going to be talking a little bit about climate change and how it affects agriculture in particular. And I'm going to lead it by way of questions to you, Tony, and to you, Andrea. In the introductory remarks that we had to our Congress early in the week, I said, and it's noted and it's well known, that climate change and climate adaptation failure is regarded as the greatest risk facing humankind today. That leads us to the question that, knowing the risk, and just to contextualize this, as far as likelihood is concerned and as far as impact is concerned, climate adaptation failure ranks above weapons of mass destruction. That leads us to the question, why don't we act more urgently about responding to it? And what are the tools that we have in the policy space, as well as in what we do every day ourselves? And what is agriculture's role in that? Tony, I want to start with you. Corteva is an international agricultural science company. What is your view on climate change and your strategies in response to that? If I may start with you.
Thank you, Janse. So certainly I think I just want to qualify first. I'm purely looking at it from an input provider ag point of view. So certainly we acknowledge that climate change is the biggest challenge that's facing us in our generation. Secondly, I think what we're certainly observing is that farmers all over the world are increasingly facing with changing weather patterns, secondly, water insecurity, and then threats like diseases, weeds, and insects. And I think the previous speaker referred to that as well. If you take that context and you think about a study that was published by the United Nations, by 2050, the previous speaker mentioned, we would be about 9.7 billion people on this earth. To be able to produce food, we'll have to increase our productivity with 50%. So I think that just makes it so much severe to be able to deal whatever climate change is throwing our way.
Indeed. Andrea, ek wil vir jou 'n vraag vra. Jy is hoof van Agri SA se risiko en rampehulp eenheid. En mense het die geneigtheid om natuurlike rampe onmiddellik toe te skryf aan klimaatsverandering. Is dit so? En gee ons 'n bietjie konteks van waarmee jy besig was in die afgelope jaar en 'n half, die laaste jaar veral, in die risiko en rampehulp eenheid by Agri SA.
Baie dankie, Janse. Ja, ek dink die grootste risiko wat die wêreld tans in die gesig staar is 'n veranderde klimaat wat lei tot natuurrampe. As ons net ook kyk na COVID-19, wat basies 'n mensgemaakte ramp is, het dit ons staatskas so onder druk geplaas dat wanneer daar natuurrampe soos droogtes en brande plaasvind, het ons staat nie die vermoë om boere of veral die landbousektor by te staan met enige rampehulp nie. Ek dink 2021 spesifiek vanjaar was 'n groot bedreiging vir die landbousektor. As ons kyk die begin van die jaar het tropiese storm Eloise groot verwoesting veroorsaak in dele van Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, langs die Oranje rivier was daar vloede. Dan moet ons ook nou nie miskyk met hierdie goeie reëns, is daar nog steeds dele in ons land wat gebuk gaan onder droogte, dele van die Noord-Kaap, Oos-Kaap en Wes-Kaap provinsies. So, ek meen in Julie van jaar het die nasionale rampehulpsentrum ook 'n droogteklassifikasie uitgepubliseer wat Agri SA sterk verwelkom. Maar op die einde van die dag, as 'n mens kyk na, het die staat die vermoë om ons landbousektor by te staan. Laat dit 'n hele paar vrae daar. En natuurlik ook die bydrae wat die privaat sektor nou uiteindelik maak om boere by te staan, is eintlik die grootste hulp wat ons kan kry. Die brande spesifiek is nou een van die grootste risiko's. Ek meen ons trek nou ek dink by 1.6 miljoen hektar wat al reeds afgebrand is in dele van die Vrystaat, Noord-Kaap en in die Noordwes provinsie. En ek sê nou net om dit in perspektief te sit, die oppervlakte van die Gauteng provinsie is 1.8 miljoen hektaar groot. So dit is bykans die totale oppervlakte van die Gauteng provinsie wat deur hierdie verwoestende veldbrande so groot skade veroorsaak het. So ja, ek dink as ons net kyk na 2021 met sprinkaan-uitbrake, rooibek quillias wat nou 'n bedreiging Noordwes provinsie is, siektes soos bek en klou seer, al hierdie risiko's dra by en ek dink as 2021 so intense jaar was met risiko's of met rampe, hoe gaan ons dit lyk in die toekoms en gaan ons staat ons boere of ons landbousektor kan bystaan? Dit is die vraag.
Inderdaad. Tony, we had a little chat beforehand, and you have an interesting position on harnessing climate change. Tell us more about Corteva's and your position on this idea of a different perspective on climate change.
Yeah, I think certainly, first of all, our belief is that agriculture on their own won't be able to solve the problem. I think we'll have to talk, obviously, to farmers, to consumers, and people outside the industry. And I think we'll obviously, what we don't always do well, is listen and learn, and then form partnerships to try and find a solution. So we would say that we need to harness science first, technology and innovation to optimize sustainable agriculture for the future. And if I talk sustainable agriculture, 2 focus areas: soil, first of all, very important. A healthy soil produces more food. And then secondly, in terms of water, we've got commercial farmers in South Africa that are keen to adapt new technology. So I think in terms of digital agriculture, precision agriculture, we need to make sure that farmers understand it takes so many millimeters of water to produce 1 kilogram of grain, and start measuring at that level, determining is that the right crop, is that the right area, and try and find joint solutions like that.
Indeed, Tony. It's probably a difficult question to answer, or perhaps something that you might not be at liberty to do so, but what are the science and technological advances emanating or coming from Corteva and from companies in the same space as what you are that you're most excited about?
Sure. So I think first of all, what we invest, like the previous speaker said, is biotechnology. I think that could be part of the solution. I think secondly, in terms of improved germplasm, in terms of dealing with the environment where we operate today, that may become worse in future. I think there's crop protection solutions, and all of those jointly can help farmers to conserve resources. I think secondly, within Corteva, we've got green chemistry that are developed through natural processes where we can provide green solutions to both farmers as well as consumers. I think the third one that falls a little bit outside the space of biotechnology is digital breeding technologies that are probably developing the fastest in the world at the moment and are going to give us the biggest gain. We're also looking at issues like, for instance, that how does heat stress as well as water stress impact the plant at certain development stages, and how can we mitigate that? So I would say those are the things that we are deploying and investing in to see whether we can find solutions.
Tony, fascinating, and certainly space to watch. Andrea, tell us a little bit. We hear a lot about COP26, something called COP26. What is it, and what's it about?
Yes, Janse, I think if you are following the news, especially in the climate change space, you will see that there's a lot of talks about the upcoming COP26. So COP is basically the Conference of the Party. It's a meeting under the auspices of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. These meetings are held annually and has been held since 1995. It's a 2-week summit where global world leaders discuss climate change globally and also the climate crisis. This year it will specifically be held in Glasgow from the 31st of October until the 12th of November. These annual conferences bring together signatory parties to the UNFCCC who ratified its international climate change, a treaty to international climate change. And effectively, every nation, if it's a state or a climate activist, stakeholders in businesses that have a direct interest in climate change come together and they discuss the climate findings and also their global response to tackle the climate change crisis.
Indeed. Now, what is it that agriculture should be looking out for? Well, first of all, South Africa should be looking out for, and specifically the agricultural sector coming out of COP26?
Specifically, I think first of all, South Africa is now moving towards a just transition to cleaner energy. That is one of the biggest, or the most important aspect that we're looking into from South African government. For agriculture, we have to bear in mind that we have to adapt to climate change. So there's a national adaptation plan that aims to be developed in alignment with the climate change bill. Agriculture is contributing to and also is affected by climate change at the end of the day. So there will be talks about how would climate change be addressed within the agricultural space to ensure food security, and also looking to sustainable development initiative, moving away, for instance, from conventional farming to climate smart farming, all those techniques and developments. And obviously it will be an international discussion which will form international policy and development that we will take back home.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay.
I want to ask you, you have an announcement to make about the Agri SA Risk and Disaster Management Foundation, if you'd care to do so now.
Yes, thank you, Janse. So, ons is baie opgewonde om te noem dat Agri SA nou die Disaster Relief Foundation amptelik op die been gebring het. En dit is nou gestig met die doel om boere en plaaswerkers wat gebuk gaan onder natuurrampe met rampel by te staan. Soos ook vroeër genoem is, die staat se vermoë om altyd die landbousektor by te staan in baie gevalle is nie altyd daar nie. En dit is so belangrik vir die privaat sektor om hierdie boere op hulle plase te hou om by te dra om die volhoubaarheid van die sektor te verseker. Ons kan nou ook ons skenkers met artikel 18A belastingvrystelling sertifikate voorsien. So dis een van die voordele. So vir enige verdere navrae, besoek asseblief ons webtuiste by agrisarelief.org met meer inligting oor die veldtogte wat ons al geloods het die afgelope jaar en 'n half, waarmee ons betrokke is, hoe om 'n skenking te maak en natuurlik 'n terugvoer te gee oor hoe donasies aangewend is. So ons is baie opgewonde van hierdie inisiatief. Dankie.
Skitterend, yes, Andrea, and especially to Tony being here earlier today. He handed over a check to Agri SA to the tune of R500,000 that'll go to our Agri SA Risk and Disaster Management Fund, which, Tony, I know in a virtual webinar such as this, we can't convey thanks, in the sense that we'd like to do with a broader audience. But again, from our side, we certainly want to thank Corteva for this initiative and this contribution, which really changes lives and has the ability to keep our farmers on the farms in many places where they've been suffering severe hardship as a result of often we think climate-induced changes and natural disasters.
Thank you.
Agri SA, in responding to some of the things that the previous speakers said, or that the guest speakers said about climate change, I think for our Centre of Excellence, the Natural Resources Centre of Excellence, one of the most important things in positioning agriculture in the climate change talks and debates is to emphasize the absolute importance of agriculture in not only responding to climate change and the disasters and the risks that are associated with it, but also in talking to the solutions that the agricultural sector has to play. I don't think many people know it, but agriculture since the 1980s has lessened, that's halved, its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions that are so typical and so topical in the conversations about climate change. As an example, if you look at the red meat industry, which is often held as one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, with a cattle herd in South Africa of 13 million that has stayed constant since the 1980s and still been able to meet the needs of red meat production in South Africa, that says a lot about the agricultural initiative and the role that agriculture has to play not only in adapting to climate change, but also to mitigating the causes of that. And these are the messages that I think that government needs to hear, especially when it goes into the COP26 negotiations and the things that are going to be addressed in that. One of the biggest things that we want to see out of COP26, I think, Andrea, you'll agree, is that the international community has undertaken, in terms of international treaties, to contribute, as from the beginning of this year, an amount of $100 billion. That figure almost staggers. That's a commitment from the international community to developing countries to address the causes of climate change, and it's something that our government in South Africa certainly, and we hope that they'll do so, are going to to be able to access and to utilize for the South African context in particular. In conclusion, and this is where I end, is that Agri SA will be presenting its climate change mandate to Congress for adoption during the course of the day tomorrow. Ons is baie opgewonde oor hierdie klimaatsveranderingsmandaat. Ons het die insette gekry van al ons provinsiale korporatiewe en bedryfsorganisasie affiliale. Dis iets wat erkenning gekry het deur Walimusa en deur die Departement van Omgewingsake, en ek is baie bly dat ons dit sal kan ophou as een van die vooraanstaande landbouorganisasies as georganiseerde landbou se antwoord op klimaatsverandering, en beide die aanspreek van die oorsake daarvan en ook die gevolge daarvan. Met dit laat ek dit. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to my guests for participating and assisting me in this presentation. And thank you, and good luck to all the endeavours that are going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.